Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Pandemic Interview Series. Today I'm talking with Braun McAsh. Braun was a swordmaster on the Highlander TV series. He also was swordmaster on a couple of the movies. He's worked in stage, he's worked on TV and movies. He's also an author and a veteran. Braun, thanks for taking time to talk to us today. Well, great. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us, Braun. I've been very excited about this because I've had the opportunity to work with you a few times and study with you, and it's always amazing. So thanks for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It really is. It's wonderful to see you again, Stephen.
It is. It's been entirely too long. One of the nice things, if there is any nice things about this whole pandemic, is that I get to see my friends that I haven't had a chance to talk to for so long. You've been in acting as in theater, movie, TVs for a long time. But when did you know you wanted to be an actor?
Oh, gosh. To be perfectly honest, I was toying with the idea right after doing my very first high school production and then going into the community little theater. I grew up in a small town, Owen Sound, Ontario. And we had a very good community theater, and quite frankly, the high school, there were two high schools, so there was a lot of competition, but the one that I went to had a very long tradition of doing a major production every year. And they were usually musicals, but for some obscure reason, the first production that I did with them was the first non-musical they'd done in many, many years. It was Jean-Henri's The Lark, which is the trial scene of Joan of Arc.
All right.
And I played the prosecuting attorney, Canon d'Estivée, the promoter. So after having sort of dived headfirst into something that intense, and I was also part of the 3-year theater arts program that had just been introduced in the high school, and getting involved in community theater, I thought, well, I wonder if I could actually make a profession out of this. Notice I say a profession, not a living, but I was very, very lucky when I first started out, but nevertheless, that was probably about the first time that I actually considered it seriously, and I think I would have probably been about 15 at the time.
So, and this is something I just recently learned about you, and you just mentioned it. It was musical theater. So you started and you did, what did you do with musical theater?
Well, actually, the Lark was not a musical. It was their first non-musical for, oh gosh, 15, 16 years. I don't know why they chose it. I have done musicals. As a matter of fact, I've done operas. I come from a musical background. My mother was a concert pianist. I play a few instruments myself, and I studied voice professionally when I was in theater school, not simply voice production as an actor, but also singing. I have some friends of mine who are have been professional opera singers all of their lives, including being in shows like Phantom of the Opera and Cats and stuff like that. So I have a very substantial musical background. I've never particularly liked my own singing voice, but I have done a reasonable number of musicals for a person who claims to be a non-singer, although my non-musicals far outweigh those.
Wow, okay, yeah, and that's something I just learned about you, which I find fascinating, but at the same time, it makes sense because your voice is so important to what you do.
It's half of your instrument. The other half is the body. And if you don't train them both, you're, you're cheating the people who are paying to see you. That's the bottom line, is that you're shortchanging the people that are paying good money to actually watch you perform, because it's sort of like a professional violinist who goes out and goes in front of a paying audience saying, well, I just started learning this instrument this week, so, bear with me.
Yeah.
No.
When did you start working in movies?
I didn't go in front of the camera professionally until 1980. Prior to that, I had done some training in front of the camera, and I had filmed, well, I had done 3 stage plays that were filmed for local television. but that was pretty much it. And of course, when I was training for camera work, it's radically different from anything that it is now. But of course, I picked that up incrementally as you work professionally. You're working within a profession that's evolving technologically, and you simply learn the new things and learn how to deal with them as they literally come up. But my very first movie was Police Academy, the original Police Academy.
I love
which
that
was
movie.
a lot of fun to do. It was in Toronto, and it was an amazing experience. And then I started doing television. I started with SCTV, Second City Television. That's where I got my union card, was on SCTV, and that was a privilege to work with because, gosh, some of the people on SCTV in the '80s were some of the finest improv comedians anywhere. So it was, like John Candy and so it was really an amazing start. In some ways, I sort of got in on the ground floor of a lot of things.
You not only perform, but you're also a teacher. And I've taken a few of your classes, and I really enjoyed them. But I remember in Banff one year I was studying with you. You mentioned that you were in the military.
Oh yeah.
How has your time in the military affected the way you choreograph or the way you move for stage and screen?
It doesn't really. I was in the Canadian Army Reserve, and I also got farmed out to, let's just say, a couple of other armies. I started as a combat infantry junior NCO. Obviously, I started as a private, and I ended up as an intelligence officer quite a few years later. I did 2 tours overseas. The reserves in Canada do an awful lot of overseas stuff, so especially if you're specialized. So there was a lot of valuable experience there, life experience, but some of which I could quite easily have done without, to be perfectly honest. But on the other hand, it hasn't really affected me that much. I have on occasions been called to teach the cast of a show how to march and how to salute and how to do physical military protocol and essentially deport themselves as a military person. I've played a lot of military roles and worn a myriad of uniforms throughout history, doing period dramas. But to be perfectly honest, it really hasn't affected me as an actor, apart from having the resources to perform a military role better from personal experience. In terms of weapons handling, I have handled a wide range of weapons, military weapons, the vast majority of which were not ones that I used when I was in the armed forces. I was trained in pretty much everything the Canadian and American armies had at the time. But I've shot a lot of weapons simply in training to perform better. And I also used to teach a firearms safety course. And I used to teach for quite a few years a secondary course called Acting with Firearms, because how you move with a firearm when you're not shooting it gives the character as much credibility as, when you're actually busting caps. And I've done things like Western single action fast draw shooting, although I'm in no way, shape, or form even remotely close to Tony DeLongis or any of the people who do it all the time. Part of the problem in Canada is that well, it's not really a problem because we have very strict gun laws, but we can own damn near anything. And it just becomes very expensive to shoot live ammo at a range. And then have to belong to the range and so on and so forth. So I don't get to practice with live action, live ammo very, very often. But I have also been brought onto movies and basically told, okay, you're helping the chief armorer make sure that these battle scenes are safe because we have 400 people fire black powder weapons, fully weapons, or things like this. And for handlers, they can't watch it all. And so I've been able to help in a little way in that, but that's really about the only thing that that kind of training has actually impinged on what I do professionally. Most of what I do as a choreographer, obviously, is swords, because if they wanted somebody who was trained in guns, there are people who have far more training than me. They wouldn't hire me to do just that.
Great. And I can see how your military experience has helped you perform quite a bit, as well as safety, because that's such an important part on set. when I've worked on set, I can remember telling the director, I can make almost anything happen. The only time I'll say no is when it's a safety issue.
Exactly. When I wrote my book, The Art of Choreography, the thing that I have to say about firearms is that while swords generally give you an aesthetic distance that is also a safety distance because you add the two blades together with a little bit of overlap, knives are dangerous on stage and in film because they don't give you that distance at all. But firearms are ultimately dangerous even with a blank. Blanks can kill you. And in the book I say, and I say in all of my classes, that they do not give you a second chance, that once that trigger is pulled, it's done, it's over. And if you haven't considered all of the safety ramifications before then, you shouldn't have the gun in your hand and it shouldn't be loaded. So it's not something that, you know, safety is always the paramount issue. What we are doing in our professions is illusionary combat. It must look real, but it cannot obviously be real. But firearms add that little extra element of, as I said, giving you one chance and one chance only to get it right. There is no second take once the trigger is pulled.
Yeah, yeah. And we've all heard stories about how dangerous those can be in on set and off set with untrained people.
And of course, when you're working in live theater, you also have to consider, including when you're working with swords or bladed weapons of any kind, you have to consider the safety of the audience. If you're pointing a weapon and you're firing the weapon towards the audience is the wrong place to be doing it. Just as when you're doing choreography of a fight, certain moves have the penchant for taking the weapon accidentally out of the actor's hand. Where is it going to go if that happens? Into the audience is the wrong answer.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of shows, what was the first show you worked on? And was it as an actor outside of high school? Was it as an actor or as a choreographer?
Actually, the first shows that I did as a professional actor were in Toronto. The first, ironically enough, the first three were musicals. Okay. I did Aladdin in Aladdin, and I also did a touring children's musical, and also did a 1920s stage musical called Blue Champagne. Ironically enough, they were all musicals. It was only after I'd been in the profession for not quite a year that I actually started working on stage in dramas, and fortuitously enough, and totally accidentally, it's sort of like the down the rabbit hole sort of thing. My first major stage jobs were when I was accepted at the Stratford Shakespeare Festival, and I started with them in 1977. So from going from drama school and doing a couple of small, low-budget musicals in Toronto, suddenly 8 months later, I'm in a rehearsal hall rehearsing with Maggie Smith and Brian Bedford and Margaret Tyzak and Martha Henry, and you know, just all of the people that were part of the Stratford Shakespeare Festival company at the time, which was one of the most amazing companies on earth. And it was scary. It was very, very scary because I'm thinking, I just graduated from drama school not even 10 months ago. What the heck am I doing here, for God's sakes? But it just, you know, that's the way things happen sometimes. And that's essentially where I started doing drama roles. And then I basically did almost exclusively Shakespeare for quite a few years. It wasn't until I got back into Toronto that I started doing non-Shakespeare as the bulk of my acting work. But then, of course, I was also choreographing, and I started choreographing professionally at Stratford when Paddy Crean, the legendary Paddy Crean, who I had the privilege of working with, and he mentored me, taught me. He was extremely generous, and I considered that he was my friend, and I hope the feeling was mutual. It certainly seemed to be reciprocated that way. He was the very definition of an English gentleman, and his knowledge was manifest. And like I say, he was absolutely, utterly generous with it. I was asked to choreograph 4 shows at Stratford because we operated 3 different theaters. And I was in all of these shows as well as an actor, but it was physically impossible for Patty to choreograph them all. You just could not do it. So in my last year at Stratford, I got to choreograph Henry V and Henry VI, 1, 2, and 3,
Wow.
which got a tremendous amount of press, especially the Henry VI trilogy. So when I moved to Toronto, I was bringing my reputation as a choreographer at Stratford with me to Toronto. I also started doing choreography at the Shaw Festival, literally right after that. And I'd also done a show at the Grand Theatre in London in the in-between as both an actor and a choreographer. I'd done things like The Prisoner of Zenda and just, a whole bunch of things. So when I moved to Toronto, I already had, albeit not a huge number of credits, but I had an established background as a fight choreographer in two of the largest theaters in Canada, and also in England and places like this. So it was sort of like, again, a rather unrealistic way to start things off. That plus the fact that there simply weren't very many choreographers in Toronto at all. But then, again, serendipity. At that time, we started getting movies like The Three Musketeers and Conan, and all of a sudden, plays with sword fights that weren't Shakespeare started hitting the stage because the movies were making them popular, and I sort of got in on the ground floor of that as well, and just sort of, it's sort of like catching a wave, and the wave starts to build, and you're up on top riding it, and starting to, how long is it going to be before it crests? Well, it seemed to be quite a while, and it was just pure luck.
Well, it's talking about luck. It's my favorite definition of luck, when preparedness meets opportunity.
Exactly. You can get luck, but if you're not in the position academically and experientially to exploit it, that luck isn't going to last very long. Flash in the pan stuff is proverbial in our professions. So,
Then we go right back to your very first illustration of the violinist who just started to learn.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing that I've said this very often, and obviously so has Tony, and Tony DeLongis, my very good friend, and there's no one else I would rather work with than him. You must never stop learning. That's what Patty said in one of the last interviews Patty ever did. One of the last things he said in that interview is, we must never stop learning. And it's true. If a week goes by and I haven't learned a couple of new things that I didn't know before, I mean, I don't consider it a wasted week, but I sort of go, I need to start looking harder, because the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, and just what a myriad number of weapons there are out there, and that they are all used sometimes very, very differently, and other times very subtly differently. And the subtlety, the devil is in the details, and the details also impinge on safety. Because that's one of the things that I've said in my book and in my classes, is that there is no generalized technique for handling bladed weapons at all. And to force a weapon to do something it wasn't designed to do creates a very hazardous situation. And it's even more reprehensible when it could have been prevented, but you did not take the time to study that particular design of weapon enough to appreciate where the differences are, what you can and cannot or should not do with them. And that's one of the reasons you keep on studying. The greater your scope of knowledge of weapons, not only the better can you choreograph, the more venue of choreography you have open to you, the safer you are. The safety of the actor and sometimes even the audience is in your hands, and that's something you don't get a second chance with either. So you have to take it very seriously.
And the crew. People always forget about the crew.
Oh yeah, I mean, they always put gun shields when you're doing firearms close to the camera. They don't do that when you're doing swords for some obscure reason.
And that sword will go right underneath the camera.
I once had to perform the other side of a fight for an actor, because the director wanted a shot where I had to go behind a handheld camera operator and reach my arm and sword, wearing the appropriate costume, over his right shoulder and do the moves around and under the camera lens for it. And obviously that part of the fight, that phrase of the fight had to be specifically choreographed to accommodate the fact that we cannot impinge on a lens that's worth $250,000.
Right.
But apart from that, it was sort of like, yes, obviously you also have to learn as much as you can about how the camera functions and how it sees things through different types of lenses and so on and so forth, to be able to create choreography specifically for certain shots, because that's what the director wants or that's what the director needs. And of course, as you said before, and it's absolutely true, there are times when safety is an issue because directors generally are not trained in these things, and they will ask for stuff that is manifestly unsafe, and you have to say no. But as I've said before, you can't just leave it at that. You have to be able to say no, then explain why it's not possible for safety reasons, or sometimes just for budget reasons, or the reasons of the physical environment. And then you have to say, okay, no, you can't have that. Here's what you can have. You have to
But
give
how about
them
this?
choices. You have to give them alternatives. The director is the director.
I have to admit, one of the things I love about doing these interviews is that it is very selfish. As you were saying, you should always learn something. Every time I get to talk to you or anybody else on these, I get to learn more about how I can improve what I do and how I can word things. And so right now, again, let me say thank you for that.
Well, you're very welcome. Communication is so important too. You might be the best teacher and choreographer in the world, but if you can't impart that information in a meaningful way to the people you're teaching, all of that knowledge is simply staying with you. So,
right. And that changes with every individual that you work with.
well, that's why I liked the Patty so much. It wasn't just the ability to learn new things. It was watching other teachers teaching the same thing I teach, but seeing how they approach that subject and how they impart that knowledge. And that I considered to be very, very important as well.
I was talking to one of the instructors that works here at the school, and he was going to a class on things that he'd already done. And I said, yeah, you definitely go. But there's two ways to look at it. If you go and you participate in the class, you are learning for yourself. But if you go and you participate, but you take notes, you're learning for everybody that you're going to talk to in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I sometimes do lecture classes with just a little bit of demonstration. And I'm always looking at the people who are in the class, and I'm seeing who's taking notes and who's not. And I'm sort of, now I have a very good visual memory. I actually have an extremely good memory for facts and stuff like this as well. I still have to take notes, obviously. I don't take as many as some people. But then right after the class, I will go and transcribe an awful lot of what I just did, because I realize I don't want to waste time. Well, it's not wasting time. I don't want to take my attention off what's going on in the class to write and write and write for fear I will miss something, but I know I'm going to remember it. And when I get back in the room, all that goes down on paper. The people who aren't taking notes at all in largely a lecture situation, I'm going, well, you're warming a seat. How much of this you're going to remember tomorrow or even tonight? And it's not just that. It's the fact that misunderstanding things, things that you may learn one day and not use for several years, with no reference point to go back to, that's kind of a danger as well. I've said this before too. It says the most dangerous phrase I can hear is, "I think it goes like this."
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have every time I go to a workshop to teach, I also go to study, and I have this little book. It's about that big. I'm on volume 2 now, and that's my big book of knowledge that I take with me everywhere I go. You were on a show called Myth Quest.
Oh yes.
And you worked again with Anthony DeLongis on this show.
Oh, it was wonderful.
What was that? And were you an actor or a choreographer on the show?
Yes.
Best kind of job.
MythQuest was a series that was shot in Canada. The episode that I did was filmed in Calgary, in the winter in Calgary.
I've been there. I know that.
Wearing armor in the winter in Calgary. Yes,
So,
it was fun.
If
Well,
I
anyway,
might, if I
yeah.
might, real quick, for people watching this who've never been in armor, in the sun, armor becomes an oven. In the winter, it conducts all that cold directly into your body. So armor gives you no real protection. Now you do have padding underneath it,
Oh yes.
but even in the cold, you're still sweating.
That just the gabazon that you're wearing, the padded garment you're wearing, essentially holds the perspiration in. So that when the cold wicking in from the armor, perspiration, now you've got frost
Inside.
forming inside your arm. One of the episodes I did in Highlander that I was acting in, when it was in France and we were doing the quickening, my character Hans Kirchner was killed, and I'm lying in the gravel, fine gravel of this incredible chateau that we were filming at night, and it's during the early winter, and it's very, very cold, and I'm lying on the raw gravel, and I've just finished like about 2 hours of fighting, and when I got up, I thought, I am heavier than I was. And I looked down, and I had, with no exaggeration, I had about 3 or 4 pounds of fine gravel frozen to my chest and stomach, just from having light, because the perspiration wicked through 3 layers of costume. MythQuest was about a couple of, a young boy and a young girl who've lost their father in this trans-dimensional realm where it's a multiverse, and the mythology of the human race in each of these universes is real. So the episode I did was King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table sort of thing. And it was written by a very good friend of ours who was one of the chief writers on Highlander, Gillian Horvath. And Tony DeLonges played Sir Lancelot, and I played King Meleager, who was the principal villain. And for the first time, Tony and I actually got to fight each other as characters. And it was wonderful because we thought, we can do anything. We can literally do anything. And the director, Steve Sciani, was great too. And he accommodated us tremendously, and vice versa. So we had a battle royal when he and my character finally met for the epic duel at the end to save Guinevere and wait for King Arthur to arrive and so on and so forth. So we really wailed on each other. Nobody died because we are both honorable men. And even though I'm a villain, I am still a Knight of the Round Table. And that's important to me. When I throw down my extra weapon, the main character's sister, who is in a wheelchair and is communicating through time and space with him from the father's lab, says, what is he doing? And he says, what is the line? Oh yes, they're Knights of the Round Table, Zoe. Fighting fair is more important than winning. And that's one of the things you have to look for in a script. What are the words and the phrases in the script that give away an awful lot of a person's character? When a person has a distinct advantage and chooses not to use it because he doesn't want to win that way. And that was one of the basic things that drove the character of MacLeod in Highlander. Unless you pissed him off once too often, then, okay, that's 3, no more. Yeah, slack you had is now gone. But no, MythQuest was really a fun show. And it was really a great thing to work with Tony, not only actor to actor, but to fight him. I always hoped that someday I would get to do that, and I did. So yeah, it was the Too Much Fun Club.
Yeah, that sounds like it. You've mentioned Highlander, and you're well known as the swordmaster on the TV show Highlander. You also worked on Highlander Endgame. What did you like best about the show?
I liked the idea and it was unique at the time, that it went through all history. I mean, we had flashbacks that went back to the Bronze Age when we incorporated the characters of the four horsemen, Mythos, Kronos, Silas, and Caspian. And every historical period, I did Romans against Celts. I did Moors against Conquistadores. These are just the battle scenes, and also firearms battle scenes too, like the American Civil War and Bannockburn, and things like this. So we had a lot of big scenes, but then just the whole idea that you could use almost any weapon. I was the one who chose the weapon for the Guest Immortal. So because I changed the people we got the weapons from Marteau, which had very limited number of historical designs, to Museum Replica, which had almost anything, and occasionally I would have swords custom made. I mean, I designed all of the weapons for the Four Horsemen. They never existed before.
Cool.
So it was sort of like, we can go anywhere and do anything within the confines of the script, but then again, when MacLeod is fighting the Guest Immortal in the 20th century, that guy doesn't necessarily have to be using the same sword that he used in the historical flashbacks, because neither does MacLeod. Yeah. There was a timeline of saying, this is when he got the katana. You can't have the katana appear before that. You certainly can't have the katana appear where it's not historically proper. Because, what would a person in the mid-1600s, in the clothing of the day, be wandering around on the street, not with a rapier and dagger, but with a Japanese katana? I mean, why would you draw that kind of attention to yourself, apart from the fact that, to be perfectly honest, it doesn't work that well against a rapier if the person with the rapier is very good. So it gave me the opportunity to really, really expand the number of weapons we see in front of the camera and the number of styles we can show in fighting in front of the camera as well. And well, a lot of times too, the choice of weapon was predicated on what is the best choice for the actor, not simply, oh, we haven't seen a person fighting with a gladius hispanica against a katana yet, that's what we'll do. Yeah, but can the actor playing that role handle it? Quite frankly, most of them had no training whatsoever. Yeah. And you had a very limited time to train them, very limited, which is also endemic in feature film for the most part too, which is what I found out on Endgame. Oh, it's a feature film. We have all of the time in the world. No, we bloody well do not. We're just shooting around this one character for a month and change before he even arrives, and the first night he's there, he has to do a scene with a sword. So it's a bit of a delusion that you have time in feature film. You used to, you don't anymore, unless it's made. If the time is made by the directors and the producers going, yes, this has to be done because it has to be done safely. But obviously, when the character knows what he's doing with a sword, that definitely affects his performance, the quality of the performance, and that's what we want, for heaven's sakes. I did an animated feature one time where all of the fighting, well, all of the movie was done in motion capture in a huge green screen studio that was used, Electronic Arts was used to film their basketball and sports games. So we have an NBA size gym set up entirely as a green screen facility with like hundreds of cameras on 4 different levels and whatnot. And I said, okay, we have 16 fight scenes, including fight scenes where you have 2 against 1, 3 against 1, 4 against 1, 5 against 1, fight scenes going across the roof of a castle, and fight scenes going up and down flights of stairs, and unusual weapons and so on and so forth. And I said, there's going to have to be a substantial amount of rehearsal time because I also have to incorporate wire work stunt into this as well. He says, how much time do you need? I says, I'm going to need at least 2 weeks of rehearsal. And they were sort of aghast, going, oh my God, 2 weeks with like 15 or 16 actors, 2 weeks? He says, all right, here's the thing, what's cheaper? Spending those 2 weeks in rehearsal and learning those 16 fight scenes literally inside out, forwards and backwards, so that when they get into this studio, they can perform them literally in their sleep, or half-assed rehearsal and getting into a studio that's costing you tens of thousands of dollars an hour, and the actors start blowing off every second take.
Yeah.
What's cheaper? That's sometimes the way you have to approach it. You have to approach it from a bean counting aspect, because it's something you can't ignore. Saying, okay, this is cheaper than this. Trust me, it is. And they said, okay, you're right. We just sort of crunched the numbers in our head, and yeah, you're going to get your 2 weeks of rehearsal. I did. And we shot out 16 fights in 10 days.
Wow, that's amazing.
All angles, including the wire work, stunts, and aerial flips, and the whole. We shot out 16 fight scenes in 10 days.
That's amazing. And it's also a lot cheaper than the insurance.
Oh, heck yes.
Insurance claims.
Oh, heck yes. And the actors liked it too.
Yeah, because they feel comfortable with what they're doing.
Oh yeah, it makes all the difference in the world, especially if an actor is, that's one of the things with film and television, is that you see the face much clearer than on stage, unless you're sitting in the first or second row. And if an actor is unsure, it shows in the body. It also shows in the face. If they're a little bit antsy and they're not 100% in the character because they don't really feel confident with the moves of the fight, it's going to show in their performance. And you shouldn't do that to an actor.
Yeah, and it's especially true with the HD and all of those things now, that really shows. You get those little crow's feet or that little bit right here when they're thinking.
Oh, the pores of your face, sort of thing. No, HD. I did a mini series called Chasing Rainbows in Toronto, which was one of the very first HD filmed things. And when we were looking at the footage on the dailies, going, holy cow, this is sharp. Apart from the fact that there was no background and no foreground, everything was coming out in stark relief. So you had to be very careful about what you were doing in terms of, do we control the background? What are we seeing in the background that's simply distracting? Can we put this somewhere else? I was an actor, not a choreographer. There were no fights in the movie. There were some battle scenes because it starts in World War I. But it was brand new technology, and there were a lot of glitches. This thing took twice as long to film as it should because of the glitches, but it was quite groundbreaking at the time.
Going back to Highlander, what was your favorite episode that you worked on?
Yeah, everybody on the conventions, everybody asks me, what was your favorite episode? Who was your favorite actor? It's sort of like, what's your favorite weapon? This is, well, the one I've got now. What would you use in a fight? What I have on me, or what I can pick up when the fight starts, unless I know I'm going into a fight situation. I don't really have a favorite episode. I liked the episodes that I acted in. I loved Duende, because I got to work so much with Tony, who, like I say, that was the first time we had actually met, was not Duende, but the episode that he did prior to that led to his coming back and doing Duende and pitching the Duende idea, which was brilliant. And the ability to actually co-choreograph for a change, because when you have somebody with that kind of training and experience, why the heck wouldn't you use it? I have to play both roles when I choreograph, and that means I'm imposing things on the actor that I haven't even met yet, that actor may not be the actor's choice, but they don't have any alternative. They have to just do it because there's no time to do anything else. Working with Tony, developing the fighting style of Canzone and integrating that into the fact that Canzone taught McLeod, so part of McLeod's fighting style is Canzone's and part of it is McLeod's and other people he may have studied with. It was really a fantastic thing. And I dearly love to do that again. That's one of the reasons that MythQuest was so enjoyable, the ability to not have to be responsible for everything for a change and actually work with somebody who I absolutely trust, especially when I'm fighting him. I don't really have favorite episodes, because there are certain episodes that stand out in my mind because of a specific unique feature or a unique character or, things like this. I just, my my demo reel is a compilation of all the stuff I really liked on Highlander, and it runs 15 minutes of nothing but fight and fight and fight and fight and fight. But those are all from episodes where I didn't just like the fights, otherwise they wouldn't be on the reel. I like the episodes, and I like the way the actors perform the fights and so on and so forth. So I don't really have a favorite. It's sort of like saying, what's your favorite book? I don't have one, you know.
Let me change the question just a little bit, though.
Sure.
What was the most challenging? Because I knowing you like a challenge. You don't want it to be, here.
Yeah, well, there's a challenge and then there's a challenge, because a lot of stuff we get in the film industry is challenging because of the time frame and the budget. I don't know how many people who will be viewing this have ever seen the film triangle. It's an equilateral triangle, and at the apex of each is a word: faster, better, cheaper. Pick any two at the expense of the third.
Yeah.
And that's basically the film and television industry in a nutshell. If you want it faster and better, it won't be cheaper. If you want it cheaper and better, it won't be faster, and so on and so forth. And that's absolutely true. So it's challenging to do something like Highlander, because we had anywhere from 1 to 5 sword fights in a single episode, and we filmed an episode every 7 working days with the weekends off, which meant that a lot of times I had to burn my weekends with actors, and also choreographing the next show, because as I'm shooting one, I'm prepping the next one. Because if we film and we finish filming one episode on Wednesday, Thursday morning we start a new one, and the actors come in and the fights have to be ready, and so on and so forth. So it was sort of like the endless boogie. You got no time whatsoever. The only time I had to prep a show where I was only prepping one show was the first episode of the year and the first episode of the French season. And that was it. For anywhere from 13 to 22 episodes, and it was normally 20 to 22 episodes, I would be working on a show while I was shooting a show. So it was sort of like work all day, go home, work all night, get up in the morning, go to work all day. And they're two different shows, obviously. And meanwhile, the show that I'm prepping, rewrites are coming in.
Yeah. Wow.
And yeah, so it's sort of like
juggling going on the whole time.
Anymore, but there's a new one. Oh, isn't that special? Most of the time, rewrites never did that, because the writers knew what was necessary, and very, very professional, extremely fine writing. David Abramowitz, Donna Leto, Gillian Horvath. I mean, we had some fantastic writers. So they generally would not make any major changes that involved massive changes in the action. They simply wouldn't do that. One of the problems was when I got into the movie, and there was this one director on Highlander who loved storyboards. And I fully understand the necessity of storyboards in terms of what am I going to film? What are the shots I need? Because now the DOP has to look at the shot list and go, this is the equipment I need to get these shots, and so on and so forth. Very important. But when it comes to fights, you can't really do that, because the storyboards are going to be drawn by somebody who knows nothing about fighting, who is not drawing the same weapons you're going to be using for the most part, and has no idea of the location. Even if it's a built set, those things change radically. So when it comes to the actual fight scene, you can just basically take the storyboards and put them in your scrapbook, because right now they are useless. Absolutely. You can't even predicate what your shot list is going to be, because you don't know what the action is going to be. And I don't know what the action is going to be until you tell me how you envisage filming it, which is why production meetings with the director are so important, and why you really have to be on the same page, because things cannot change on the day because the director has an epiphany. Yeah. So that's, I've been very fortunate working with extremely good directors who understand that as well. So
yeah, and I can definitely see the challenges there.
Oh yeah.
Can
we do this instead of that? No.
Yeah, no.
Especially when the fight scene is designed specifically to accommodate a very specific setter environment. It's designed to go from right to left, not left to right. If you turn it around and go left to right, everything that the original moves avoided, the moves are now hitting things.
Yeah.
So no, you can't do that. This is where you sort of have a meeting of minds with the director and explain to them, this is how this part of the art actually works. That's why the book that I wrote, I encourage directors to read it as much as I encourage actors and choreographers. So, you know, understand what is involved in shooting fight scenes as opposed to action scenes.
Yeah.
They're radically different.
I'm guessing that you have to really take in the set as a character because it's so important.
The environment is incredibly important for safety, and also what can you utilize in the environment. A lot of times on Highlander, when we're in locations that we do not own, a lot of the choreography is predicated on what do we have to avoid? What can we not hit? What can we dress in that we can use in the action? Is this portion of a built set actually set up behind it to be able to take a person being thrown against the wall or against the baluster of a staircase or something like this? The set has to be built to accommodate the action, including stunts in the action. You have to be able to accommodate hiding things. And that's part of the problem on stage. In film and television, the camera lens is the audience, and you can control what the audience sees. On stage, the audience sight lines are set and immutable, and every person in the audience sees that action in a different way. The people sitting flush to the stage, the people in the wings. If it's raked, the people in the back of the theater are seeing it at a higher angle. The people in the balcony actually see behind furniture. So there are very few places to hide things, including killing blows. So the choreography aspect of doing a stage show is very different from doing choreography for film and television because of the lighting as opposed to the lens.
Yeah, I when you're talking about that, I remember a story Anthony was telling me about you and he going through the mansion that you were fighting in on the Duende episode. We have to avoid this, but we're going to murder this television.
Oh yeah, that wasn't
mirror.
That wasn't the Duende episode. That was the first episode that he did. I can't remember the name of the episode because I did like 77, 78 episodes. The names are a little bit elusive. But yeah, we dressed in stuff specifically to destroy. You know, we cut a television in half. We trashed a bookshelf. We cut a small tree into, and so on and so forth. And then all the stuff we had to avoid completely. Because we just didn't want to have the the expense of replacing a $30,000 etched glass door or something like this. So we very often are able to do stuff like that, but in a lot of cases it's just about not hitting anything that's there. I remember this one episode where in Highlander, when we were shooting in France and we were doing this fight scene at the Musée des Astronomies, and this is the astronomy museum, and we're fighting on a marble tile floor. So even with proper footwear, it's kind of slippery. We're fighting near historical astronomical instruments that are not in cases.
Ooh,
and we're fighting, and right behind us, and within sword reach, if you were silly, was the original telescope of the legendary astronomer Tycho Brahe. Irreplaceable historical artifact. So, yeah, that's sometimes what you end up having to do, and you do it. You do it.
Just for my own question, do you ever have any input on the set? The choosing of the set or the location?
Not really, no.
Okay.
Generally speaking, if we're outside, inside, whatever, I do meticulous measurements of the set, or whether it's an exterior environment or whatever, and walk the entire exterior environment so that there are no surprises in the grass, sort of thing. But generally speaking, although occasionally I've said, wouldn't it be nice if we da-da-da-da-da, sometimes I've had individual elements of a set built and dressed in so we can utilize it in the fight scene. But generally speaking, in terms of the design of the set or the way the set is dressed or the actual physical environment, no, I don't really.
Okay,
But again, we had excellent designers, fantastic designers.
that's always helpful, I'm sure. You've worked on several movie projects. Things like Percy Jackson, Lancelot. You've done a lot of TV shows. What do you find is the difference between working on a film project versus a television project?
Well, generally speaking, like I said, in film you have more time to film the fight. But the important thing about film is that it's all about getting the maximum amount of footage on a fight to give to the editor. You don't have the time opportunity to shoot that much footage of a fight in television simply because you don't have the time. You have X number of days as opposed to weeks or months. I'm getting back into writing. I'm doing the outline and the background research for the sci-fi novel and collaborating with this chap on the script, the story of which my partner, Joanne Bentley, who is my falcon master mentor. I teach her sword. She taught me falconry. And she and I developed this. I got the idea, and she and I did like a couple of week brainstorming thing on it, and developed the plot outlines. Because originally we were looking at it as being a TV series. It may still happen, but right now we're looking at it as feature film and a novel. TV writing, I have no experience whatsoever in writing TV, and episodic television has very, very specific constraints. It's very different from feature film script writing, and I simply can't do it. I was talking with David Abramowitz, our chief writer on Highlander, and he was the showrunner. He was also involved in some other projects I did, and he's a magnificent writer. And I was bouncing some ideas back and forth with him. I gave him a script outline, and then I gave him a few scenes of dialogue, and he was very, very specific in terms of, okay, this is good, but this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, and telling me why it doesn't work. And I understood that. It was just, it's my inexperience. But then it's also the term of time constraints in terms of you have 4 blocks, you have teaser, tag, you have commercials, and so on and so forth. And every block has to be within a certain number of minutes of running time, yada, yada, yada. You don't have that garbage well, it's not garbage. You don't have those exigencies in feature film. And you certainly don't have that in novels, which is what I'm mostly, writing fiction is what I'm mostly experienced in. And, setting up the situation whereby so much is created in the reader's own mind. And you're guiding their vision of your story. Yeah. So it's a much, much different discipline. So now that I'm teamed up with a person who is an actually experienced film writer, he just is about to send me the latest installment of what we've been working on for the last 6 months. So we'll see how far that goes. But I know it's doable. It's just a question of getting the focus back. And like I say, the pandemic thing is it's too easy to fall into bad habits. So you just have to sort of resist that.
Yeah.
I mean, I've not really gotten to the point, because quite frankly, an awful lot of people don't know as an actor some of the people I've worked with.
Yeah.
So they don't ask, well, what was it like to work with so-and-so? What was it like to work with so-and-so? They're an actor. That was one of the nice things about people like Peter Ustinov, who I worked with, and Maggie Smith, and Nicholas Pennell, and all Martha Henry, and just so many Canadian and American and international actors. I did a movie with Donald Sutherland and Christian Slater, and
what movie was that?
Dawn Rider.
Okay.
Dawn Rider. I don't do much. But, I actually got to work with both of them. And it's sort of like, they're just actors. Well, what I mean is they consider themselves actors. They do have a protocol. Some actors do have a protocol on the set, on a film set. Or quite frankly, when you're working with them on stage and you're in performance as opposed to rehearsal. Because on a set, you don't have time. You don't have time for distraction. You don't have time for small talk. And if an actor is standing there alone and you walk up to them and say, "Boy, I really liked you in this movie," and they're probably going to go, "I'm trying to get ready for this scene in my head and in, everything. I don't want to be rude, but please, I need this space to myself for a while because we're just about to go in front of the camera." There's absolute validity in that. There has to be. I would sometimes, depending on the role I was playing, I would literally lock myself in the dressing room for like an hour after I got the makeup on and the costume on. I would, sometimes I would listen to music that would help me get into the mood of the character, or I would never run lines. If you're running lines in the dressing room before you go on, there's something radically wrong. But I would just sort of sit and get myself into the zone so that when I walked out of the dressing room, I was that character. And that's one of the things that is very difficult in film and television. Very often you just don't get that opportunity. And also on stage, I do my own makeup, unless I have to have a wig or prosthetics. One of the things I really had trouble doing in film was somebody else is doing my makeup. Well, when I was on stage, when I'm doing my makeup, I'm seeing me change. I'm seeing the character becoming in front of my face. And now a person who has no idea what I'm going to be doing with the character, because they haven't seen me rehearsing, is doing my face. And I sometimes look at it and go, "That's me? Really? All right." So it's, there were quite a few adjustments to make. But generally speaking, these actors, the best actors are just consider themselves actors. I can't honestly say in the 40 years plus I've been doing this. God, I've been doing film and television for 40 years. I've been doing stage for 44, 45. And the number of actors that I worked with that I could go, I'm really not anxious to work with that person again, are literally only about 2 or 3. Literally. And even then, you could work with them. I just didn't necessarily want to hang out with them. But it was sort of like, no, I'm sorry. I understand the star system, but it's just sort of like being called maestro, or actually I'm entitled to the title renshi in the Japanese martial arts as opposed to sensei. And I would never, ever, ever use that. And I encourage people not to use it describing me. It's not about false expectations. Like I said, I honestly think it does put up a barrier. But it's sort of like being called a star is what other people call you. Mm. When you start thinking of yourself as a star, you put false expectations on what you think. It's a form of self-entitlement, I think, insofar as you are now expecting people to treat you in a certain way.
Almost like,
well, guess what? A lot of times I've worked with people who I've never worked with before and have never seen anything that they've done. Oh, this is a really big actor. Really? Okay, well, I'll take your word for it. Hope he's good now. But it's sort of like I've worked with a lot of people in film and TV who also came from a stage background, and they're the easiest ones to work with because they have. I remember one time I was doing this TV series in Toronto called V.H. Adderley. It was a spy series. The lead, Winston Reckert, was a stage actor for a long time. So was the female lead, Dixie Seidel. And I was playing this East German intelligence officer who wasn't fooled by them at all. And I only had one scene, but it was like 4.5 pages of dialogue.
Long scene.
Just 3 of us. And Winston and I had the bulk of it. And I was in my trailer, and I was there for several hours. And I thought, well, okay, this is normal. I'd been in film and television long enough to realize, oh, they're getting behind or something's, whatever. And I heard the knock on the door, and I opened it and says, "Mr. McAsh?" "Yes, lunch." Oh, for fuck's sake. I was almost 9 hours before I got in front of the camera. And this is a 12-hour day. So generally speaking, in television, you're trying to get 8 script pages a day. So this is a 4.5-page scene. This is half of a script day. It's half of a shooting day. And by the time I get onto the set, they've already been on the set for 10 hours. And the crew knows this is a 4.5-page scene, and they're going, oh God, we're gonna be here until 3 in the frickin' morning. So I get there, and Winston, Dixie, and I rehearse a couple of times, just by ourselves in the corner sort of thing, because it's a very static scene. It doesn't require a lot of, I'm in the shot, that's it, and they move to me. And that's the blocking for the scene until they leave and I leave. So you can pretty much, you can pretty much fix 3 cameras and that's it. Turn them on and walk away. Apart from zoom in, zoom out, getting faces and whatnot, and retaking for POVs. It's not a complex scene to film, but it's 4.5 pages. And we start filming, and the crew's sort of going, they're just going on and on and on. It says, the first thing we do a master, then we'll start doing pops. And we did the entire master, start to finish, 4.5 pages, without a break and without a single mistake in even a word.
Wow. And
the crew, says, and cut. Okay, can we push in on Mr. Record and Mr. McAsh with camera A and camera B? And the crew is sort of standing there going, really? We shot the entire scene out. We shot 4.5 pages of dialogue with all the shots and all of the POVs in under 2 hours.
That's crazy.
In under 2, well, like I said, it was a relatively static scene. So you didn't have cameras being forced to follow moving people. But we shot 4.5 pages of dialogue in under 2 hours. And when we said, and that's a wrap for today, this is Mr. McAsh's wrap day, and we got a standing ovation from the crew. And I said, does that happen often? He says, no, it never happened on this show before. He says, were we that good? He says, well, yeah, you were really good, but it's also the fact that the crew thought they were going to be here for another 3 frickin' hours. They have never had people capable of doing 4.5 pages of dialogue. A guy who's really famous for that is Anthony Hopkins. Oh, yeah. Did you ever see the movie Amistad?
Yes.
Brilliant movie. And of course, he plays Adams, President Adams. And that speech at the end where he's talking about slavery and whatnot, and taking the Constitution, tearing up the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and so on. That is like over 5 pages of written dialogue. He did all of that in one take.
Wow.
He did all of that in one take. And apparently that's one of the things that Tony is known for, is that he rehearses by himself. He rehearses the hell out of the script. He literally knows it word for word, inside, outside, forwards, backwards, and upside down. And when he goes in front of the camera, by God, he is ready. And the crew, when he did that, that whole speech was done in one camera take, with a couple of cameras following him and so on and so forth, and wides and what. But that whole last speech of his was done in one single take, non-stop take. And the crew was just agog, because they're simply not used to a film actor doing this. Well, why wouldn't they? I've done Hamlet. I've done Richard III. It's not a question of being able to act the role. I mean, think of the number of lines and the fact that how many huge speeches does Hamlet have? How many soliloquies does Richard III have? Or a lot of other characters as well. I did Henry in The Real Thing. Henry has speeches in that play that go on for like 2 pages, 2.5 pages. So it's, of course you have to learn it. Of course you have to absolutely be book perfect. And the sooner the better. You can't do anything with a character. You can't bring a character off the page when you're wandering around with the script in your hands, because you're constantly referring to the script. As soon as you do that, you take your eyes off the actor that you're playing with. You're not reacting anymore. You're not even listening anymore, because you're going to want to, fuck, I'm on the other page now. It's just, you know, it's a nightmare. So the sooner you can get off book, the better. I'm a fairly quick study in some things. A person gave me for an audition one time. He says, "Here, I want you to do this." He says, "How long is it going to take you?" I said, "Give me a half an hour." So I went into the John, and it was a major speech from a play called 1,000 Clowns, and it was like about a page and 3/4 single speech. And I learned it, and I went back, and I did the entire speech, word perfect, as the character. And he was just sitting behind the desk. He says, "You learned that in less than half an hour?" I said, "Yeah."
That's my job.
Yes, this is, you know, I mean, obviously some people learn lines at different rates. I don't claim to have a photographic memory. I have a very good memory for some things, extremely good memory for some things. I can still do entire soliloquies from Shakespeare plays I did literally 40 years ago.
You and I, we met at the Patty Queen workshop up in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
which is a workshop for actors, stuntmen, martial artists to bring everything together to improve everybody's game. When you are invited to teach at a seminar, how do you decide what to teach?
Well, in terms of the Patty, my first Patty was 2000. And at that time, they were every year as opposed to every 2 years. So I've done quite a few Patties. And generally speaking, I sort of gotten into a position where I teach pretty much the same, or taught pretty much the same thing every year in terms of practical classes. Always did one lecture class, which was the art of choreography and so on and so forth. That was the thing when I first was invited to the Patty. I said, "What should I teach?" I said, "Well, what do you want to teach?" I said, no. I would like to, I mean, you probably have a lot of people who teach German longsword and Italian longsword and Italian rapier and saber and knife and so on and so forth. I teach some of these things in different ways. I incorporate different masters as the crux of how I teach one particular weapon. Generally speaking, tell me what isn't being taught, and I'll decide whether or not I have the qualifications and experience to teach it. Because if I don't know a weapon well enough, I'm not going to try and teach it to somebody else. I have to know the weapon and its style and system quite well before I deem to start passing the basics on to someone as a student. So basically it was what's not being taught, or how could I teach what is being taught, but here is how I could teach it differently, which may be of value. So that's basically how I figured that. I used to teach a class called Filthy Rapier Tricks, which was all of the really nasty killing techniques of single rapier and dagger, because nobody else was doing those techniques. They exist, but nobody was doing them. I've developed over the years some very unique methods of knife combat, which nobody else is teaching. I don't for a second believe I invented them, because if something is physically possible, the number of millennia we've been using bladed weapons, surely to God somebody figured this out before I came along. But
Right.
Mostly I was sort of going, well, I can't claim that I invented it, but I can't see anybody else teaching it anywhere. So maybe I'm just the first to teach. So here it is. So yeah, that's basically how I chose.
That's a good. I teach a lot at workshops, and it's always interesting when I get the request for class descriptions. And I have, like you, I have things I like to teach, and but I'm always looking for how to go about finding new things that I can teach, and that's a great way to do it. What is somebody teaching there, or what's not being taught there that I can teach?
Exactly.
Now, speaking of that, you said in previous interviews with people that, and you've written that you have the most experience with European weapons. But do you do other weapons from other parts of the world as well?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, part of my job as a choreographer is to have the broadest possible experience, and at the same time, the most in-depth experience possible with the greatest number of weapons, because you never know what you are likely to be called upon to teach. I've taught, or well, I've choreographed for kukri knife, Gurkha kukri. I've choreographed Philippine arnis, machete, a whole slew of other weapons. I am trained in Japanese katana, classic Aido, the Masashi school of classic Aido, the Nito Ichiru, the two heavens is one school. I also teach it. I've trained in Jiang, Dao, and Sung sword in the Chinese disciplines, and Korean Gumdo. I do a wide. I've even trained in Indonesian weapons, and actually choreographed for them once. I don't consider myself good. I certainly don't consider myself a master. To be perfectly honest, I don't consider myself a master of anything. I don't call myself maestro. I don't call myself sensei or anything like that. It's not that that I consider it pretentious. I just feel that in a lot of ways, referring to yourself with a title like master or maestro or something like this automatically sets up a bit of a psychological barrier between you and the student. I'd much rather have the student call me Braun. That's my name. Well, it's one of my names. It's also not my first name. So it's it's being approachable to the student, and I just find, oh, you have to call him maestro. No. No. If other people want to call me that, that's fine. I'm never going to refer to myself as that. I even have academic qualifications and certain titles that I could use, but I don't use them because of why I just said.
That's good advice. And speaking of advice,
Mm-hmm.
what's the best advice anyone has given you working as an actor and or as a choreographer?
I go back again to Patty's admonition: we must never stop learning. Literally, we must never stop learning. I sometimes do choreography that I'm not working on a show or a movie or anything like this. I do choreography as an exercise, as a practice, going, what would it be like if I put this weapon against that weapon? How would I mesh these two styles, totally disparate styles, together? Again, that's one of the things that Highlander really, really allowed me to do, because an awful lot of the duels in Highlander, of immortal against immortal in the present day, were weapons that have never, ever fought each other in history. I mean, when, for God's sakes, did a gladius hispanica ever come up against a katana? Or, something like this. So I do these things as an exercise. I work new audition pieces simply so I have new material. One of the things as an actor is that when you're auditioning in an area and people start seeing you again and again and again, you shouldn't use the same audition material over and over and over, because it's sort of like, I don't use it. I only used it once in my very, very early career, but it's sort of like, and Mr. McAsh is next, and God, I'll bet he's going to be doing To Be or Not to Be again, sort of thing. So you work new things because it challenges you as an actor. You have to challenge yourself as an actor. I admire actors who take roles that don't allow them to be stereotyped and typecast. Johnny Depp is a very good example of this. In a lot of cases, so is Robert Downey Jr. They're both brilliant actors, but they like living outside their comfort zone.
Yeah.
And as soon as you define a comfort zone, you're putting limits on your own creativity. And as an actor, I'm very insecure. I come off stage sometimes, or come out of a scene going, well, that was crap. And invariably, when I think that, other people are, the next day or something, man, that was really fantastic last night, or the other day I was going, oh, really? What were you seeing or hearing? Because it wasn't the same inside this head.
Yeah.
There is a point where being overly critical and insecure does hamper you, because it also prevents you from trying new things because you're afraid to. And that's the thing, you can never be afraid to try new things. That's one of the reasons. I mean, Maggie Smith, I had the privilege and the honor of working with Maggie Smith off and on for 4 years. And she's not only the most approachable and the sweetest of people, but she is a consummate actress, amazing actress. She does everything so well, drama, comedy, but she's mostly known as a comedic actress. And that is much harder. Comedy is so subjective, and it's much harder to act comedy than it is to act drama. Because what I think is funny or what you think is funny is not necessarily what the audience is going to think is funny. It's sort of like a comedian going out. I actually have done stand-up comedy on quite a few occasions, professionally in clubs here in Vancouver.
Wow.
And it's sort of like you go out there and you have no idea what these people are going to find funny, so you just lay it on them. You have to be able to adapt, and you can't do that in theater or film because these are the lines, period. But somebody once said, I can't remember who it was a British comedian who I really respect. She's an Irish lady. And she said, stand-up comedy is very much like sex. If you're not getting the right noises in a few minutes, change what you're doing. But you
can't argue with that.
No, you can't really do that in film and television because you're set with what the director needs you to do, what the rest of the cast is expecting you to do. You can't go off the rails. You can change things night by night because it's reactive. Things happen. You have to adapt to them. But you're stuck with those lines. Stand-up comedy, that's a bit of a different thing. But comedy is far riskier for a performer than drama. And that's why I admire people like Maggie Smith and Robin Williams and people who are extremely fine actors, who are also incredibly good in the comedic venue because it takes more guts.
Yeah.
It seriously does.
That's a really neat way to look at it. Are you still auditioning?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Good.
I mean, not right now.
Well, not right now.
I actually started the year off very well. I mean, the last couple of years have been terrible for me just because.
I remember.
Well, the age, the look, and of course the hip isn't doing me any favors either. But this year started out fantastic. I did like 5 or 6 workshops, including the Vancouver International Sword Symposium. But I started the year doing these workshops, and I also got like almost 3 weeks of work on the remake of The Stand.
Oh, yeah.
And they knew, they said right off, they said, Mr. McAsh has a bad hip. He limps. He has to use a cane. He cannot run because if the hip pops out, he's done. So they said, yeah, we know. We don't care. We want Mr. McAsh. So there were a couple of scenes where we had to run. And I said, well, we'll simply not put Braun in those scenes. So they gave me a day or two off, and I got something on Mighty Ducks. So the year really started out fantastic. And then, of course, COVID-19 happened and everything went to hell in a handbag. So now I'm trying to do what I can, writing. I'm developing a script with a friend of mine. And I'm also starting a science fiction novel.
This has been amazing. Every opportunity I get to talk to you, I learn stuff. And this has been no different. But I have one last question for you. If you could meet your 15-year-old self, when you were in high school doing those musicals, or not doing the musicals, but doing that play, what advice would you give that 15-year-old Braun McAsh?
Well, I've always been interested in the sciences ever since I was a kid. I have actively studied at the master's level archaeology, paleontology, cosmology, astronomy, theoretical physics. I have. I'm starting to write science fiction, but I write science papers. You can't see it behind me, but in the back of my desk, I have a whole series of pages with equations in physics and theoretical physics that I refer to all the time. Planck's, the equations from Planck and Dirac and Lorentz and so on and so forth. I try to base an awful lot of my fiction writing on real science because I want to, I don't want to do Star Wars-y stuff. You don't have to explain everything, but there has to be some basis in reality for what you're doing. So I was very interested in all of this stuff to the point where I was on the verge of choosing a science as opposed to theater school. And I thought, yeah, but I can still study science when I'm in university. You know, in my university, you had the option of doing 4 years of theater school and graduating just having done the theater courses. But if you wanted your degree, a BFA degree, you also had to do science courses, you had to do English courses. I actually had to do 2 years of clinical psychology, which is also kind of handy because you realize, God, I am crazy. It says so right in the book. I would say, okay, you're at the beginning of your career, or will be. You are going to have, hopefully, unless you do something really stupid, which I have done quite a few times, a long life. And do you want to go through an entire life and at the end of it, look back and have regrets because you never had the guts to try the things you really, in your heart, in your soul, wanted to do? It's not as though science is a second thing. And quite frankly, there's not that much security in it. If you want security, you know, go into banking, go sell shoes, you know, something. I mean, there is no such a thing as a secure job anymore. But what's going to make you happy? What makes you, how do you think you can contribute as a whole? I mean, science obviously contributes massively, but so do the arts. They enrich us. They explain and maintain our culture. They expand us. They tell us who we are, where we came from. They give us ideas of where we might go. And at the very least, they simply entertain you and take the average person out of their existence, which some people need to be taken out of every now and again to maintain their sanity. I think that's extremely valuable too. The arts are grossly underrated because most people simply see it as entertainment. And the best arts are still with us because they're much, much more than that. We still perform Shakespeare for reasons other than he's entertaining. So I thought, okay, do you want to live life as fully as you can? Do you want to end life regretting everything you didn't have the courage to try? And I think that was one of the has been one of the major driving forces, because I've, you know, obviously in any art, you have good times and you have abysmally bad times.
Yeah.
And it is perseverance. I mean, one thing that somebody said one time is that the most important thing in the arts is perseverance. There are thousands of cab drivers in LA who are keeping their resume and their 8x10 in the cab in case the right person comes in the back. There are people who have left their careers to do other things because they had a family and then had children and whatnot. And that's their decision. And Lord knows that's important too. But it's also, can you live with yourself at the end of your life, having made the decisions that you made? And that's something you can only answer for yourself.
Yeah, that's not only a good answer, that's deep. I can see your psychological studies in that.
Well, I told you, I am crazy. Textbooks say so.
That's right. If you were going to give advice to somebody who's just starting in the industry, what advice would you give that person?
Make sure you understand what you're getting into. An awful lot of people go into our business with false expectations. The chances of getting discovered, I mean, it does happen. You just happen to get in front of the right person at the right time. I've gotten a lot of my roles by sheer luck, just having, you know, knowing the right person or being in front of the right person at the right time, or somebody seeing me on something going, I have no idea who that person is, but I'd like to give an audition. It's very hard to determine what advice you can give somebody else. I think what I would say is make sure that you understand the business you're getting into. Work as a background extra. Understand what goes on sets. Observe and record and learn how a working set actually functions, which is radically different, obviously, from theater. You can't afford to make mistakes at your own expense. Take courses. If you don't go to a theater school, take courses. Oral interpretation, voice, how to do different types of voices, how to do different physicalities of movement. Learn how to handle the basics of a sword. Learn how study, 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 because as Tony has said, and I say as well, we are not preparing. We prepare for the job we have. That's why we have the job. For the rest of our lives, we are not preparing for the job we just did. We're preparing for the job we are going to get, but we don't know what that is yet. And it's the same thing with acting. Acting is the whole body. It's the instrument. It's your body, it's your voice, it's your face. You have to learn how to use that, just as a musician has to learn all of the nuances of their instrument in order to get the maximum performance out of that instrument. It's an interaction between the instrument and you. Well, it's an interaction between your brain and your body and your voice and your face and everything else. That is your instrument. And if you don't take proper care of that instrument and you don't constantly try to improve it or expand it, you're only doing yourself a disservice. So that's one of the things that I would also say is understand the industry you're getting into, including the business and financial aspects of it. I mean, that's one of the things when I teach in theater schools, and I've done a lot of theater school teaching, including full semesters. I take the people who are in the graduating class for that year. If I'm not teaching them, I take them aside and I have what's called a reality class. And we just sit down for an evening and go, and these are all of the other things about the industry that nobody's probably told you. How do you get an agent? How do you get that first audition? How do you prepare auditions? How do you choose your resume photograph? How do you do your taxes?
Yeah.
All of the stuff that is very, very necessary, because it's not only an art and a craft, it's a business. And you have to have an appreciation of all of those aspects.
I just talked to a gentleman, and the interview is coming out very soon. He's a children's entertainer by the name of Andy Zandy. And he does amazing shows for kids, but what was so interesting talking to him was outside of physical training, because he does superhero, he's a clown, he does magic, he does all those things for kids. But all of his study into copyright, into advertising, into client acquisition, as self-employed, which we are, we don't have that bi-weekly or monthly check coming in.
No, not hardly. No, I mean, it is very important to understand the business aspect of it and how to keep, proper records and so on and so forth. But yeah, just generally, if you're going to be an actor, you have to start somewhere. And how do you start? The first time you present yourself to an agent to get representation, how do you write a resume? How do you properly format a resume? How do you choose the resume photograph? Because some people, I've seen some resume photographs that people have said, "What do you think of this?" And I'm going, "Oh no, don't send that out, please. Don't send that out. Seriously, do not send that out." Why do you need a different photograph for television commercials than for a stage or film? Because the physicality that they're looking for is an entirely different thing. How do you put together a reel? On and on and on. How do you present yourself at your very first audition, knowing that you are going to be terrified?
Yeah.
Do not be overconfident, but or don't be fearful. Don't let I have to have this job. That's the easiest way to lose this job, is to go in with that kind of vibe. So there's an awful lot of know yourself, self-psychology involved, and a lot of people avoid knowing themselves. I don't know why. Maybe it's because they're afraid of what they'll find, or maybe they're afraid of what they won't find. But it is necessary. It's not like self-analysis. You don't have to get Freudian or Jungian about it. But you have to understand why you do the things you do. If you can't explain why you do the things you do more or less on a daily basis, how are you going to impart that into a character? The best actors just don't pull all of this stuff out of the blue.
Yeah.
So,
and the audience only gets that background of 20 minutes to understand why you're doing what you do.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, on stage, it's a different thing. That's one of the big differences of stage over film, is that you start at the beginning and you go to the end, and it can sometimes be 2.5 hours or more. I've been on stage for 3.5 hours constantly.
Wow.
The film and television is different because you shoot out of sequence, and that's part of the thing with actors, is that you now have to examine what scene are we doing right now? What does my character not know yet? Because you cannot allow how you interpret the line to be colored by information your character does not have in scene 15, because that information is only revealed to that character in scene 25. So that's another aspect of film that is radically different from stage, especially the fact that, you know, the retakes and retakes and retakes and retakes. On stage, you got one crack at it, and you don't get to bring in the stuntman.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Yeah, there's a big thing right there, is don't screw up.
Yeah, no pressure.
None at all. Oh, this has been amazing, Braun. I've so enjoyed talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And
I did, seriously. I've done a lot of interviews, but it's always nice to do one with a friend.
yes, and I know everybody watching this, I know you'll enjoy this as much. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being here.
It's my
I will add one more bit of advice to what you gave everybody.
Please.
Find a mentor.
Yeah.
Find somebody who's already walked that path. They've already made the mistakes. They will help you. But
Yeah.
listen, find them, and often, like yourself, you are so knowledgeable and you're so willing to share your information. And again, like I said earlier, this is purely selfish. I want to be better in what I do, and you have that information, and I want to learn from you.
Well, don't we all? I mean, I was so
thank you for
privileged to
taking
work
the
with Patty. No, thank you for having me.
And we'll be in touch and talk again before too long.
Excellent. I look forward to it.
All the best to you, sir. Thank you.
You too.
That was great. I love talking to you, Braun. You have so much experience and so much knowledge, and thanks for sharing it with us. If you guys liked what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button below and click on the notification icon. We have lots of videos on this channel that include interviews, as well as lots of classes that you can take and learn about different weapons in the historic European martial arts.